Thank you. Thank you. This is, I don't know that I've ever been as befuddled and nervous as I am tonight. Today, see? Because this is just a great honor, and I want to bring up our guest. He has had a career that's long enough that I wrote it all down, and you know, it takes many, many pieces of paper. So here's just a few highlights. Writer-producer of All in the Family, Sanford and Son, One Day at a Time, The Jeffersons, Good Times, Maude, Fernwood Tonight, Mary Hartman, these are just a few. He flew 52 combat missions in World War II. He founded the advocacy organization People for the American Way, which is any one of these things, and then you just retire, right? The recipient of the National Medal of Arts, a Peabody, many Emmys, and he was one of the first people inducted into the Television Hall of Fame. He was on South Park. His new book is Even This I Get to Experience, and he's the only 92-year-old man that I know who has done ecstasy. Please welcome Norman Lee.
Thank you. Hey, whoa, whoa. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Do you want to get right into the ecstasy stuff, or
Let's get right into the ecstasy stuff. Anybody got some?
Anybody holding?
This is, speaking of, this is the title of the book. So even this, you know, I get to experience. And it's all ecstasy.
That's a good bumper sticker.
It's a great room.
Well, let's jump right in if we may. I don't want to make everything about All in the Family, which was the show that my parents wouldn't let me watch. But every time, you know, I have them all on DVD. I have watched them all again. And every time you watch an episode of All in the Family, you kind of are amazed that it even existed, right? I mean, when you see it in contrast to, I mean, there's very good shows on television these days, but it's just a show that you can't imagine it being on television today. You did, that of course sounds like an insult and is a compliment. I hope you understand. But you did episodes about abortion, rape, drugs, disease. You did an episode where a main character, Edith, lost her faith in God due to a brutal murder of her friend who was a transvestite. This is all in a situation comedy. And, you know, I want to stress that this is all while addressing the great seriousness of these topics, also produced some of the biggest laughs that you saw on television. But
there isn't anything you said that wasn't common to our living day to day. I mean, this is what was happening in our country. So we were reading newspapers and scraping the barrels of our own lives, and that's where all the ideas came from. The crazy thing is, I didn't think we were doing anything but reflecting life as, of course we were looking for the more interesting aspects.
Right.
And to understand the foolishness of the human condition is to understand there are laughs anywhere and everywhere.
Did you, when one of these controversial topics came up,
right?
Did you, I'm curious what the conversations with the network were like. You know, any example of that?
Well, since people always ask about the abortion episode, there was a great guy, I'm not remembering his name at the moment, who was running program practices at CBS at that time. And he heard we were going to do it, and he called me, and he said, and he's in New York, and he said, you're kidding. I said, I said, no. He said, but, it's happening in my neighborhood. I mean, I'm happy it's not happening in my family, but it's the kind of thing that could. Yeah, I know, but So there were long conversations. Now, as a result of those conversations, I don't think I would have thought, but for the conversations, of presenting the other side of the argument as graphically and dramatically as we did. In the two episodes about dealing with Maud's abortion, we invented a friend who was pregnant with her 5th child, and she couldn't afford the 4 she had. And abortion was for all the people who believed in abortion and abortion rights, she was a perfect character. But she wouldn't have considered it for anything in the world, and she specifically was not Catholic. So that we were dealing with that problem on a non-religious basis, and there was the strongest advocate for we can't, take a life.
Right.
And but for the conversation with now they still didn't want to show on the air,
Yeah.
but we did the interesting thing is showing on the air in, let's say, October, November, and it was the audience, viewing audience didn't expect it at all. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know what was coming. And there was no ruckus at all. It was just not a big deal. Sure, there were some letters, but no big deal. By the time the show was in reruns, the far right, especially the religious far right, knew it was coming. Then they were carrying on. They lay down in front of William Paley's car in New York, in front of my car in L.A., and went berserk. And that's, and that's what's happened all along the way.
Yeah.
The American people, for the most part, live with all of these problems. They recognize them, and it's no big deal.
Well, and it's it didn't feel like, there wasn't a preachiness to it. It came so out of the characters. Mm-hmm. This was a woman, a 47-year-old woman contemplating having a baby, and it was an accident. That's why I guess it's. I think that today that has been, maybe you would agree, but replaced by. You can do that kind of stuff in satire, but people are having a harder time doing it within characters on a sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why you found such.
I don't understand why,
yeah.
But it seems to me they can do anything on off of network, because
right.
I don't know what doesn't exist.
Well, All in the Family was one thing that I find incredible. Was it was based or inspired by a British show, right?
Yes, Till Death Us Do Part.
Yeah.
Johnny Spate was the writer.
To me, All in the Family is such the quintessential American sitcom, and I just wonder if you could talk about sort of how you transformed whatever that I.
Well, I hadn't seen the show. I just read in TV Guide about a show that was a hit in England about a father and son that were, politically fighting about everything, and he was a bigot. My father used to call me the laziest white kid he ever met, and I would scream at him that he was putting down a whole race of people to call me lazy. and he would scream back at me that wasn't what he was doing, and I was the dumbest white kid I ever met. So I lived with that. That was easy stuff.
Right.
And so I did what I did. When I did see Till Death Us Do Part, they stayed with the politics. They didn't get into human problems at all. It was just altogether political. And they only did 6 shows a year.
Right.
America is, if we are expert at anything, it's excess.
Yeah. I know Phil Rosenthal, who's a mutual friend, he had an idea at some point, was because of the way things are generally, taking properties from Britain has become so big a deal now. He had an idea to pitch over here, and he said, you know what I'm going to do is go over to Britain, make 6 episodes.
And he did.
Here. Yeah. Yeah.
And he still did the same over here.
Maybe a different country next time. You know, maybe I have this wrong, but I think you've said...
I think you have it wrong.
Okay. My wife would agree. I think you've said that Maud is the character you relate to the most, or at least a lot. Is that? Yeah. Could you talk about that? I'm just curious about that.
Well, she... when you ask that question, I think of Rob Reiner and me. Rob is like a second son to me. And Rob is one of these liberals, progressives, left-leaning guys who really knows his subject. And so you can hear him effusing on the things he cares about, but chapter and verse. I feel the same way about 99% of everything he feels, but I'm not as conversant with the problem as he is. I'm not the scholar he is on these issues. I'm more like Maud. You know, she was more like Archie. She was bellicose in her liberal, you know, she in Florida, I'll never forget, I always think about this when I think about that. Florida, Esther Roll, they're getting ready to do a telethon. In their community, they did a telethon every year. So they're practicing, rehearsing at home, and they're singing Me and My Shadow. And right from that reaction, I guess there are enough people here who know the song. And Maud insisted upon being the shadow. And so that's how I relate to her. I'm as passionate as she, but I know as little. I know I'm right. And if you ask me, why don't you ask me? Who are you politically?
Who are you politically?
I am a bleeding heart conservative. You will not fuck with my Bill of Rights, my First Amendment, my Constitution, my guarantees. And there is room for everybody, and I believe in fairness and all those things. How you get there is political. And I'm not the politician. I just know we have to deliver on those promises because they are, after all, our promises.
And you have the Declaration of Independence to prove it.
No. I had the Declaration of Independence for 10 years, traveled it over 50 states, most of the states, multiple times. And then I needed my foundation was gone, and there were other things I wanted to do. And so I think the owner is Bill Gates.
Oh. That seems appropriate.
Well, my understanding with Sotheby's, who sold it to me and sold it for me, was that they would not sell it to anybody that wasn't going to I didn't want to sell it to anybody who was going to keep it in a living room or a den. It had to be in a public space or travel. So it will be in a museum he's instituted.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, Mr. Gates has certainly done a lot of good things as well.
He does.
I just want to point out that everything he says is like it would be any of our career. That's the highlight, and then you just retire, right? Any piece of his career becomes, it's amazing. And that's why you have, the book is just, every chapter is like, well, this would be my whole life, and then
why don't I read a bit?
What's that?
Why don't I read just a bit?
Yeah, oh yes, yeah. That's great.
I'm not going to, am I going to bore you? How many people have read it? Look at that crowd. Let me just introduce myself by reading the preface. When I was a boy, I thought that if I could turn a screw in my father's head, just a 16th of an inch one way or the other, it might help him to tell the difference between right and wrong. I couldn't, of course, and ultimately he and I had to pay a serious price for his confusion. In late June of 1931, just out of 3rd grade, and a month away from turning 9, I was eagerly looking forward to my first experience at summer camp. A roll of cloth tape imprinted with Norman M. Lear, Norman M. Lear, Norman M. Lear, sat on the kitchen counter, waiting for my mother to cut it up and sew my name into the clothes I'd be taking with me in a few weeks. Meanwhile, my father was about to take a plane to Tulsa. None of my friends in Chelsea, Massachusetts, knew anybody who had ever flown anywhere. It had been only 4 years since Charles Lindbergh flew 33.5 hours in his single-engine Spirit of St. Louis to get from New York to Paris, and the rare plane that was spotted in the sky had us kids chasing around in the streets yelling, "Lindy, Lindy." So Dad flying to Oklahoma was a big deal. He was traveling on some kind of business. Monkey business, said my mother, who sensed that the men he'd fallen in love with were not to be trusted. And for my upcoming birthday, he was going to bring me back a 10-gallon hat, just like the one worn by my favorite film cowboy, Ken Maynard. He was arrested upon his return on July 3rd for receiving and trying to sell some phony bonds to the Boston brokerage house E.A. Pearson Company. High on my list of vivid childhood memories is a photograph of my father on the front page of the next day's newspaper, coming down the steps of the courthouse with one hand holding his hat over his face and the other manacled to a detective. 5 weeks later, he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in Deer Island Prison off of Boston Harbor. That evening, our house was filled with friends and relatives offering comfort as they bought the furniture my mother was selling, she having decided on the spot that we couldn't possibly continue to live in Chelsea in such disgrace. At one point, someone I didn't know but instantly disliked offered to buy my father's red leather chair, the throne from which he had controlled the radio dial on our floor model Atwater, Kent, just as 40 years later, Archie would control the Bunkers family's TV viewing from his living room armchair. As my mother and this scavenger agreed on a price, I was devastated. The loss of my father's chair was like losing him twice in the same week. And as if that were not enough, I would soon learn that my mother planned to take my younger sister to live with her and leave me with various relatives until my father got out of prison and the family could be reunited. I clutched all that remained of my summer dream, that unused roll of Norman M. Lear cloth, a piece of silent sadness, which I managed to keep with me well into my 30s, perhaps even my 40s. And my eyelids bit down hard on the tears I was fighting to hold back. At that point, someone, an uncle or cousin or neighbor, placed his hands on my shoulders, looked deep into my eyes, and announced with that soapy solemnity that so many adults use when they are offering gratuitous counsel to the young, "Remember, Norman, you're the man of the house now." This had to be the moment when my awareness of the foolishness of the human condition was born. I was just past my 9th birthday. My father had been brought down before my eyes from a 10 to a zip. My mother and sister were about to disappear from my daily life. My own identity was no more than a thin bit of fabric in my fist. And I was looking up into the face of this fatuous asshole, telling me that I was the man of the house now. And then he added with a smarmy smile I wanted to rip from his face, No, son. A man of the house doesn't cry." How could I not have developed a deep appreciation for the absurdities amid the gravity of our existence? let me just read till I get to the title. In my 90 plus years, I've lived a multitude of lives. I'm 92 today. You know, the amazing thing about it is something happens at 90. At 88, 89, yeah, everybody's happy to see you. The minute you hit 90, you know, I can get a round of applause just getting up from this chair. Crossing a room is an ovation. Anyway, I'm the same. But in my 90 plus years, I've lived a multitude of lives. There was that life with my parents and relatives, a life as a kid with my blood buddies, Herbie Lerner and the Schwartz twins. A life in high school, zeroing in on the humor in our existence. A life in college, cut short by World War II. A life as a crew member in a B-17 bomber, flying 52 missions over Europe. A life in the world of, a life in the world of entertainment with sublives in television, radio, movies, and music. A life as a political activist. A life in philanthropy, a late-starring life as a spiritual seeker. 3 lives as a husband, 6 as a father, with my youngest born 48 years after my eldest, and 4 as a grandfather. In the course of all these lives, so much has happened. Just want to cut to. Well, I mean, you know all of this. I won the National Medal of the Arts, and this and that, and the other. Winter Olympics. That's where we opened the Declaration of Independence for the first time. I came to a place where I blew a fortune in a series of bad investments in failing businesses, and reached a point where I was advised that we might even have to sell our house. Having heard that we'd fallen into such dire straits, my son-in-law phoned me from New York and asked how I was feeling. My answer was terrible, of course, but then I added, but it must be crazy, John, because despite all that's happened, I keep hearing this inner voice saying, even this I get to experience. Early the next morning, my son-in-law was on the phone again. He'd heard me say once that I wished to be cremated when I died, and he was calling to ask me to please change my mind. I asked why. In a voice that choked a bit at the finish, he answered, because someday I want to take my children, your grandchildren, to a gravestone that reads, even this I get to experience.
It's an amazing book.
I'm going to raffle off this book as a gift for the foundation.
Oh, fantastic.
That copy.
Yeah. You talk about your father a lot in the book, and he's a touchstone for a lot of your creative ventures, and I actually rewatched a Maude episode that I think dealt a lot with your dad, her sort of solo therapy episode. Yeah. I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we did an episode. My father did some things that the reason he went to jail is who he was. I mean, he kited checks and he borrowed from people, my friends, when high school friends, he borrowed from. And he was, you know, the struggle I have talking about him is I love him. But he was difficult. And he did some amazing things. My favorite play when I was a kid, old enough to drive a car, I was 17, was Frank Molnar's Lillian. And it became Carousel many years, the musical many years later. But it was playing at the Westbury Playhouse in Connecticut, which was like an hour and 30 minutes drive from Hartford. And I was taking Charlotte, who I was picking up in West Hartford in my car, which was a Model A that my friend Sidney and I had paid $200 for or something. And my father said to me, I'm going to come home early and give you the new Studebaker. Nobody remembers the name Studebaker. And he said, I want you to take my car, pick up Charlotte. So 3 o'clock, let's say he was supposed to be home. He's not home, 3:30, 3:45. With tears coming down my eyes, I get into my car, I drive to Hartford, to West Hartford, I pick up Charlotte. And we drive through Middletown, Waterbury, New Haven. We get on the Merritt Parkway. We're within 20 minutes of the Playhouse off on the Merritt Parkway, and the horn is honking, honking, honking. My father had come home 20 minutes after I left, had chased me, and found me on the Merritt Parkway, turned around, changed cars with me. I drove the west way to the Playhouse with Charlotte. So I wanted to do that episode on Maud. And of course, I couldn't do exactly that. So what we did, the story that we wrote was, she visited her psychiatrist, and she came in to say that she was having a terrible time with Walter. And she couldn't understand why she was having a difficult time with Walter. She came to a place, oh, by the way, this was an episode where Maud was lying on a couch. All you saw of the psychiatrist was his hand on the arm, his fist on the arm of a chair. That's all. All Maud, 100% of the way. She won an Emmy for this. And she's telling the story about she's upset with Walter. Excuse me for. I want to go back and forth. I want to look at my host here.
Look at that. Don't look. You don't want any of this.
And so she and talking about Boaz, she remembered something about it, and she said she had said earlier, of course, you know, I hate my father. They're upset with him about this, that, or the other thing. But in the course of talking about Walter, she remembers this moment, as I remembered my father in that, you know, changing cars with me. It was her high school graduation party, and she had fallen in love with a gray coat with a Persian lamb collar. I could hear her with these words. This gray coat with the Persian lamb collar, and her mother didn't think they could afford it, and her father bought it, but it hadn't been delivered, and the store was closed. Somehow he got on the phone, found the owner of the store, had him open the store, talked him into opening the store. He raced to the high school with her coat with the Persian lamb collar, and she put it on as she was going into the high school. She remembers that in the middle of saying she has this trouble with Walter because she hates her father, and Walter reminds her. And when she comes to remembering the Persian lamb coat, she starts to weep. And she weeps, oh my God, how I loved my father. How I loved my father. She finishes that, and she said, well, doctor, it's been 4 years or 6 years. I guess we're finished. And she gets up, and she said, thank you. You've been wonderful. And she wipes her eyes, and she walks to the door, and I cannot remember what it is she remembers about Walter. And she turns, after having said, goodbye, doctor, you've been wonderful, and so forth. She said something about Walter, and at the door, she opens the door, and she turns and says, see you Tuesday? Oh, it was great.
It's again, something you can't even imagine. I mean, one person, 25 minutes or whatever, you know,
Yeah,
only
she was
her,
fabulous.
mostly lying down on a couch. It's such a beautiful, you know,
Yeah,
just, I mean, you're watching someoe's therapy session and relating to it, and she just did an amazing job.
as you just watched mine.
All right, well, let's see what else we can get out of you then. Well, I did want to, I mean, listen, that's a good way to bring up. Multi-camera sitcoms right now, I think, they haven't fallen out of favor, but they're getting kind of a bum rap, I think. I think they're viewed as a little archaic and a little, and broad, and, which, you know, I think is bunk, but especially because you got such nuanced and amazing, but subtlety out of performance-wise out of some of these actors, and your shows contained some of the most skillful use of like extreme close-ups in a sitcom, which I mean,
Yeah.
generally
That's because we were working with a live audience. I don't know how many
Right.
this room holds, but it seems like about the size. We had 240, or 240 to 250 people is what our the audience part of our stages held, and they were as close as the fourth row to the actors and the cameras and so forth. So, and the shows were written as one-act plays, or two-act plays. We had to make a room for a commercial. And that was one of the earliest fights I had with the network. They wanted 2 interruptions.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't bear 2 interruptions in 27 minutes or whatever the hell it was at the time.
Now, I was gonna say now it's 4. So
Well, now it could be as many because it's one camera in short scenes.
Yeah.
Single camera. But if you think about the shows and those close-ups that you're talking about, the actors had the opportunity to ride on the emotions of the audience. So when, you know, if they were laughing at something Archie said and the camera's here, and Archie is holding to a moment, and then maybe he might lift an eyebrow, and they'll laugh some more. And that you can't get that any other way.
Right.
It's got to be the audience and the actor working together.
that's, you know, it's an amazing thing that you see now, because the trend is they do a lot of multicams but without an audience, so they can have shorter scenes, and I mean, otherwise it would take 8 hours, 10 hours to film it. And I mean, at least on Everybody Loves Raymond, Phil was very much a disciple of your method, Phil Rosenthal, and we got to see some of that in action. You know, people would always say, you know, those laughs, like why do they pump it so full of laughs, you know, with the fake laughs?
They weren't being pumped. They
just
were real.
We would take laughs out in editing, because we would say it sounds like it's fake, you know, and we got to make it sound more realistic. But was there anything, I mean, was there a director or was there a method, you know, were there things, I just wonder if you have like anything about, you know, sort of getting those performances out of your actors, you know, any stories about that?
Just great actors. I mean, I quarreled with, Carol quarreled with me about the content of scripts constantly. But when he slipped in the 3rd day or so of rehearsal into the character, you know, nobody, he stayed with the meaning of everything because he had to, because the story was heading in a direction. But he embellished, I mean, nobody could write the actual dialogue as well as he could speak it. It just came out of the reality of he was the character after a couple of days.
And since you say that, was it ever, I mean, I know from the process, the table read is one thing, and then you go into some camera blocking for a couple of days. And I always found the couple of days before you start on the upswing towards the live day to be soul crushing, sometimes.
Yeah.
Because as a writer, you selfishly want them to be at 100% all the time, which of course is impossible because they're rehearsing. That's what rehearsing is for. Yeah. So Tuesday and Wednesday, it always seemed like nothing was working because they're figuring it out. And did Carol or anybody else, I mean, would they sort of, you know, keep it at sort of 30% and then click in, you know, performance-wise most of the time?
Unless there was a problem, I didn't see it until the dress rehearsal. All in the family were always problems because we were arguing about the script. But after a few days, when Carol you know, mystically passed through some membrane and became the character, and then it was golden, and then I would come to see the run-through Friday evening. We taped on Tuesday evening.
Oh, okay.
Dress rehearsal was Tuesday afternoon. So on Friday evening, I would walk in, and in a case of All in the Family, I mean, I'd be blown away by what they found in rehearsal.
Right.
People who know the show well remember A Sock and a Shoe and a Shoe and a Sock. You remember that? The Archie and Mike's, look how well they remember that.
Yeah.
Archie and Mike
Classic.
have to sleep together. That is in the same bedroom. They get up and they're dressing, and Mike is putting on a sock and a shoe and then a sock and a shoe. And Archie says, "You can't do it that way. You got to put on a sock and a sock, and then a shoe and a shoe." And they have this way. Well, if I put on a sock and a shoe and something's wrong, I'll hop to the. Hopping, you don't hop, you walk.
Yeah.
And it was but it was gold they found. And, you know,
there was something about...
we who wrote the script walk in, and it was, again and again, there were these kind of gifts that the director and the cast found.
It's also amazing that, you know, the pace of comedy today, I think, has to be sometimes it's so plot-driven that they don't leave room for stuff like that, you know? That's just two characters hashing out their differences in the most metaphorical, you know, mundane but metaphorical way.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember it to this day. And there was something about, you know, because Archie trumps him at the end, I think. There's something about, no, Mike trumps him, I think, because Archie's saying, if there's a fire, you got to run out, you know, you got to run out, and I'm going to have socks on, so I'm going to be able to run out. And then Mike says something about, oh, if it's a flood or something, if it's raining, because Mike gets the last word where he says, "I'm going to be hopping around dry while your feet are soaking wet," or something. I can't remember. It was amazing. It was this amazing, you know, escalation. But again, I just appreciate so much in all of your shows. You know, it's hard to find shows that take the time these days.
I don't know. We loved what we were doing to a person.
I know you have an idea. Well, I guess this is sort of two questions in one. Is there stuff that you'd like to see tackled on television? And I'm pretty sure you have an idea.
Yeah.
This is where I
had something called MRSA. For those of you who may not know what MRSA is, it's a killer. So it's difficult. I can close my hand this far. I can beat the shit out of anybody. I just can't open it.
If you're watching on the web, Norman Lear just
Hi, kids.
But yeah, I know there's an idea that you have been, you know, I guess pretty passionate about, and I wondered if you could talk about that, because I 100% should think it should be on the air.
Yeah, no, I want to do a show about your generation and mine, and, you know, retired people, 65 up, in a community in some place like Palm Springs or Santa Monica. And I wrote a script called Guess Who Died? And because that is the question 3 times a week minimum. Guess who died? So, I think it's as funny as the title. And a lot of people running these places think so too, but they don't want the demographic.
Right.
You know,
Right.
one Betty White Duff a demographic fill. I do begin to understand it's the fastest growing demographic with the most expendable income, all of those, all of their reasons for putting a show on, and they would.
Yeah.
But they feel that older people already have their minds made up. You're not going to sell them anything new.
It's so weird. People like to see things about themselves, and
Yeah.
you know, that's the fundamental lesson of comedy. Certainly, just the relatable stuff. It just seems like there's literally probably the biggest uncatered to audience right now that's just out there.
I think so.
You know, well, I'd like to write for it whenever
young
it exists.
people, there's nothing that says young people won't enjoy watching funny, even if it's with older people. My slide rule says funny is funny.
Yeah.
When we were, the audience was, the network was concerned with Good Times, which was the first of the African-American families. But I don't know whether they thought there weren't enough people watching in that community or something. But that was as big a hit with white people as it was with blacks.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody was watching the show. That's why it was in the top 5. So I don't know, but they learn hard.
It's true. It's true. After I read your book, I personally you helped me through something. Because you have a way of dealing with writer's block. You also have a name for it.
Shit in the head.
Yeah.
That was my name for it.
Shit in the head, which, as you point out, is an anagram for, that's in the book. But I wonder if you could just talk about how you what made the transition, I guess, from because you had sort of a big revelation about it.
Oh, somebody suggested I dictate instead of writing, and the way he put it was, Norman, you got 50 people in a room, and one small door, and there's a fire. Everybody rushes to the door. Some are going to be trapped. Everybody won't get out. If you let them out 2 at a time, 3 at a time, they'll all get out. Think about whatever is on your mind as you're writing a page the same way. Let the ideas out. You can arrange them according to sex or height or race or whatever you want to do later, but let them out. And so I started to dictate. At the time I wrote, it happened at the time, I wrote the screenplay for Come Blow Your Horn with Sinatra. That was the first thing I dictated. Now, strangely enough, I went back to now a computer, not a typewriter, for the book.
Huh. Well, I found it revelatory because I would come home and do little voice memos and stuff when I have an idea or something. But I think the computer has made it. I mean, for writers, it's just anybody who it's such an instantly easy way to edit, which of course is the worst thing you can do while you're trying to get it all out. So now I've become this crazy mumbling person as I walk around my office.
That's great.
And I email the mumblings to my assistant, and she types them up, which is, what I guess.
Wait a minute, you can email the mumblings to you?
Yeah.
No, truthfully, nobody's told me that.
iPhone, just and then you record it, and then once you record it, you can email it to whoever. I mean, I email it to myself, and I email it to her, and then someday it will be hacked, and I will be a fraud. I will be out of the business. But yeah, it's very, very easy. I think it won't email anything over a half an hour, but...
The man just gave me another 92 years.
All right. That's the best thing I ever could have done then. Unfortunately, I just experienced that I have shit out of the head. Once I'm done, it's just a bunch of pileup.
Oh, tell me about that.
But no, but it's been really, really helpful. I just say you should do that. He dictated an entire screenplay, and then you said it was 200 pages, and then you carve it down. And
Yeah.
I just was surprised by how useful it was at that great length. That it really is like sitting there wanting to kill yourself, and the difference between that and feeling like you're being really productive by dictating and then editing later. It was a very helpful thing, so thank you. I now have a list of things I just want to jump around. I'm going to jump around like a crazy man, and I know there's going to be some audience things in a few minutes as well. I was reading about, you have a story about the Martha Raye show in there that you used to write for, and I thought it was...
Oh, anybody know the Martha Raye show? Yeah. I adored her.
Well, the way it came to be canceled seemed like it was a pretty good lesson in network politics and also politics, you know. So I wondered if you could talk about that.
Well, I had 3 years with the Martha Raye show was a book musical. It was like a Broadway show. It was only an hour, and there were, of course, not new songs. We couldn't do new songs every week, but we did standards and just wrote them into the scripts. And we had great guest stars. Paulette Goddard, if you remember her name, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Tallulah Bankhead. I mean, it was fabulous. And the two things to which you refer had to do with, the first thing had to do with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. The guy who owned Revlon, Charlie Revson, really didn't care for the Martha. He didn't like her humor. He was a good guy, he just didn't like her humor. So the only thing he liked about the show was that it was rating well. So we did one show where I was directing it as well as co-writing it. And we did a scene where we did an old sketch. We wrote an old sketch into it. The sketch had been done 1,000 times. Red Skelton used to do it brilliantly, where he thought he was doing a commercial. He thought he was drinking soda, and he was really drinking wine, or and he was getting soused and didn't know it. So this was a scene where Martha was getting soused and didn't know it. And I had her play. I said, I want you to play it like Carole Lombard, or play it like Olivia de Havilland, play it like one of those on her tippy toes. So she was playing this hilarious character. And, but it was another kind of Martha Raye. At the dress rehearsal, I didn't know that her husband was a fellow by the name of Nick Condas, who was a dancer, but he had a lot of these kind of friends. And Nick Condas was in the audience, and evidently said to her after the dress, after I had given her my notes, I didn't know he was there, said, "What the hell are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm Loretta Young. I'm playing it like Loretta Young." And he said, "Fuck Loretta Young. I mean, you're Martha Raye, for God's sake." And he left her with that. I didn't know it had happened. The show was live, on at 8, off at 9. And when she gets to that scene, and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. is in the scene. When she gets to that scene, and she's hot and she's drunk, she takes it down her dress, up her, and then she explodes at one point into Douglas Fairbanks' face, and his makeup is running down his face. I'm hoping his wife, who ladies somebody who was there watching in the dressing room, I'm hoping that she'll be upset as hell, and I'll have somebody on my side. But she just thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. And so did the audience, and so did, but Revson said, anything like this happens again, and you're off. So 3 shows later, 2 shows later, a little girl, maybe there's somebody here that might remember, Gloria Lockerman was her name, a little black girl, wins the $6,400 question. Or maybe it was $1,000 by then, I don't know. But it was on radio. It was a big show. Hal March on television did it for years. It was just on a subject. This had to do with boxing, strangely enough. This little girl won. She was 10 years old or something. So she was an instant star. We wrote a show around her. Tallulah Bankhead played her bad fairy. Martha Ray played her good fairy, and that was the show. And at the end of the show, when the women were the 2 stars were taking a bow, I sent Gloria out to take a bow with them, and they picked her up and held her and kissed her. And maybe Revlon got 40 letters, I don't know, or 140 letters, the 2 women picking up a black kid and kissing her. This was before the Harry Belafonte thing with the singer, where they embraced, and it was a big. Imagine we lived through those times. Jesus. And that was it. We were not picked up the next season.
Show business. I didn't mean to bring the room down with that story. I feel responsible for bringing it up. But
it's an important story to remember where we come from.
Absolutely.
And versions of it continue today.
Yeah,
it's for sure. Not like we've lived it.
This is a more lighthearted story, but one of your first breaks came with Danny Thomas.
Yeah.
And maybe you could talk a little about just what happened, how you came to his attention.
Well, we had a little office on Beverly Boulevard at Kenmore, above a delicatessen, $6 a month. And we were writing at night. We were selling door to door during the day and writing at night. And learned in Variety that we had an idea for Danny Thomas. Learned that his agent was Phil Kellogg at William Morris. How I remember these names, I don't know. But Kellogg was a statesman among agents. And at the lunch hour, I called his office, hoping he'd be at lunch. Happily, he was. And I got a secretary. And talking as fast as I could, I said, I just spent 2 days with Danny Thomas. I'm with the New York Times. I'm at the airport. I think I hear them calling my plane. I have 2 questions to ask him. Before I'm going to write it on the plane, file it as soon as I get in. And she gave me his telephone number. I called him. I couldn't say New York Times to him. And the only reason he talked to me was because how did you get my number? So when I told him how I got the number, he got a kick out of it. He was looking through at that moment, he was looking through his trunk, as he put it, for a piece of material that the next night at Ciro's, he was doing a Friar's Frolic. And most of the audience knew his routines. He was looking for something that he hadn't done for a long time. And I said, well, this could be new. He said, I can't learn it. I said, it's only 5 minutes. He said, that's the amount of time. He said, get over here right away. So I said, well, this is like, 12:30, 1 o'clock. I said, we'll be there at 5. He said, you said you're in Hollywood. You're calling from Hollywood. I'm in Beverly Hills. What do you mean? We hadn't written it yet. It was just an idea. It was just an idea. I didn't know I was going to get him on the phone. So
this is my nightmare, by the way. I can't even imagine.
You're not here by 10 minutes of I would have said, forget it. And we got there in time. We sold it to him. He paid $1,000. Said if it really worked, he would pay $5,000. And it really worked. because somebody was sitting in the audience who called me the next day, and 2 days later we were in New York writing a Ford Star review starring Jack Haley. That's how it started.
I feel like that story would go a different way if it, today. You know, I'm trying to picture the celebrity who gets a call on their cell phone and then it's somebody, oh, I tricked your assistant. I feel like it was a more innocent time in a good way.
Oh, I think it was a more innocent. I think about that all the time. Let me just tell you this as quickly as I can. Fred Allen, do you know the name Fred Allen? He was a brilliant, you know, nobody liked him around. He was on radio. There was, after we were doing the Martin Lewis Colgate Comedy Hour, there was talk about him doing a Colgate Comedy Hour. So my partner, Ed Simmons, and I spent a couple of hours with him talking about the possibility of our writing it. It didn't happen. It never came to pass. But at Christmas, I sent Fred Allen a Christmas card. Some days later, I got a letter from him. It was always no uppercase, all lowercase, saying, I don't send Christmas cards myself, but I understand that people who do like to feel they were received, like to know they were received. Yours was received, thank you. So I wrote back and said, I never write to thank people for thanking me for a Christmas card. But I understand that people who do like to know me. But then I added P.S. Samanow said, like a last name, capital S, Samanow said the andirons arrived with one leg broken. Just to, I get a letter back from him in some detail about the way those andirons were packed. and in care of me, there's a letter to Sam Samanow. And also explaining about, you know, there's got to be something wrong with him if he reads it. So that started a series that went for several years.
Wow.
I had stationery made for Samanow and blotters when they don't exist anymore. But I remember the stationery was Sam Samanow. My bill, if you ring it, I'll sell you an ingot. And we had several years of back and forth. When I came to New York, we had Samanow seminars. We'd go out to, and I met a couple of great people through him that I would never otherwise have met. When he came, anyway, and that's what started me thinking about that was, I don't think it could happen today.
Yeah.
Because we were moving at a much more slower pace, and there was time for this kind of romance, because there's romance in that.
Sure.
And there was time for romance.
Today you would be going back and forth on Twitter, and he would have blocked you by now. That's what would happen.
Yes.
And then, you know, how do you can't, then you have to email somebody, you know. I've never been blocked. I don't know why. You know, no, but that's a very, you know, I mean, even when I was, the art of the letter and the sort of building upon each other's joke is amazing. You know, that's something that doesn't happen in slow motion today, like you're talking about. Right. One of my first formative experiences was we copied, there was this thing called the Laszlo Letters. This guy wrote fake letters to Jerry Seinfeld kind of took it up later and wrote fake letters to a company and just all like complaints from a crazy man, basically. Right. And we would imitate them because we just thought that was hilarious. And so we'd spend a lot of time writing a letter, and we wrote to Thomas's English Muffins about how we tried the sample, the jelly sample on the cover, and it was disgusting. Why would they put that? I mean, I don't even know why we thought it was funny. But and then they sent us. They would inevitably, the great payoff was getting that form letter, or not even a form letter, but just a very corporate response to your obviously crazy letter, you know. thank you. We're very sorry you were dissatisfied. You know, here's a coupon for Thomas's. And that's...
But there's a great character there.
Well, we were copying somebody already. So.
No, I'd make him 12 years old.
Oh, yeah.
He writes these letters, and brilliantly written, you know, and funny as hell.
This is all copyrighted, Internet, all right? This is our project. Nobody step in.
Do we have writers here, too? Yes?
Indulgently, I don't know, only because I'm not sure. Well, Fernwood Tonight, for me, all right, but not indulgently. I'm glad it's not indulgently. I mean, Saturday Night Live came a little before it, and I guess, but I was a little too young to start watching when it was on. Fernwood Tonight was my show. I actually had the opportunity to work with Jeremy Stevens on Everybody Loves Raymond, and he worked on that show, and it was, to me, that was, you know, my friends and I would sit in our basement, and put on a tape recorder and imitate Barth and Jerry, and you know, just be them and try to do our own Fernwood Tonight shows. It was to me the pinnacle of. I bought all Martin Mull's albums, you know. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that even came about.
Well, it came about because Mary Hartman, we couldn't keep it up. Exhaustion, not anything else. I mean, she was exhausted. And so somewhere in the second year, I love talking about Mary Hartman, too, because that was just...
Sure, yeah. Please.
That was, just to cover her for a moment, that was a show that was completely about what it was about. It was about the impact of the media on a simple housewife. And on the very first show, she was troubled by some waxy yellow buildup.
Right.
And there were sirens going off in the background, and Loretta her next-door neighbor came running in to ask her if she'd heard that a family of 5, their 2 goats and 8 chickens were killed just around the corner. And Mary is still with the waxy yellow buildup. I remember her saying, who would kill 2 goats and 8 chickens? And the people. That was the first show. And toward the end, she's on some corporation or something has named her, or possibly named her, the Mother of the Week. And she's on the David Susskind show, who had a late-night talk show. And there are 3 media psychology heads that are interviewing her as the Mother of the Week. And they drive her insane. On the show, in this 1.5 hour uninterrupted, because it was Mary Hartman at 11 o'clock at night, it wasn't interrupted by commercials, this woman performs one of the great performances. She is absolutely driven insane. And a couple of shows later, she's in an institution. And she's sitting there looking at a television set, and somebody's adjusting something. And she says, is that what I think it is? And the nurse says, yes, Mary, it is. And she said, and the way she said it, I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. And now the other faces of the institution crowd in, they're all a little mad. And she says that I, Mary Hartman, am a part of a Nielsen family. That was right near the end of the show. So from beginning to end, it was the impact of television.
Wow.
Oh.
Fernwood, whatever you want to say.
It was going off the air, and Martin Mull had played a wife beater on Mary Hartman, and he was very much in my head, and I loved his talent. And Alan Thicke was working with me before he became an actor. He was a writer, and he and I talked about doing this. We got Fred Willard, and they became a team instantly. they became a team. And Mary Hartman took place in Fernwood, Ohio. So we did Fernwood Tonight, a show in Ohio. And as recently as last year, I have suggested to a couple of the late night shows, imagine that Fernwood Tonight has been on the air all these years in little Fernwood.
Right.
And cut to it now and then. The guys are around, they're funny as ever. Imagine them at this many years later, they're still on the air. It's like Guess Who Died.
It's, yeah, I watched it obsessed. I didn't have cable, and it was on where I was in Syracuse, and it was syndicated, I guess, on a New York City station. And I was hanging out with my friend probably a lot more than I should have been, just to watch that show. If you ever, I think it was reran on Comedy Central for, I don't know, a little while, but I don't know if it's out there somewhere. I know the Maude episode that we were talking about is on YouTube. I don't know if it should be on YouTube. I don't know if it's supposed to be on YouTube, but that is, please go watch that, because that's amazing. By the way, whenever, I'm not sure what time the audience questions are coming, but if I've ignored somebody's signal, let me know. A couple of stories. If you know, these are just stories I read in the book, and like I said, I'm kind of jumping around. But you tell a story about when you were in, is it Foggia, Italy?
Italy.
You were stationed there, and Frank Sinatra came.
Yeah.
And there was sort of a show business lesson that was, you didn't realize you were being taught at the time.
This was 1943 and a half, 44. And Sinatra was a huge star, and we had been overseas for a while. And all we knew was we hated him. Because our girlfriends and our wives and our mothers and our, the women in our life were just in love with this guy. And he had a punctured eardrum, which is why, that sounded like bullshit. A punctured eardrum. And I mean, we just, and we didn't, it wasn't like we knew his voice or had heard him singing or anything. We just knew this guy was, all we ever heard about him was what we read in Yank, or what our, the women in our lives were writing us about Frank Sinatra. So they were like, it was a field, and they put up a big stage, and there were maybe 20,000 of us from 3 different bases out on that field, and sitting on the grass. And the KPs, kitchen police, had given a lot of the guys some old vegetables to throw at the stage. I mean, that was the mood. That was the feeling.
He seems like the kind of guy who'd take that well.
And when we before anything started, there were 3 men on the stage, GIs, who were sweeping up. And then a guy came out to take the microphone, and we didn't know who Phil Silvers was, but it was Phil Silvers. And he started to talk to us, and he seemed funny. And then he got annoyed at the 3 guys who were sweeping, and he got into a fight with them, and then it developed into a fight with one of them. And at some point he said to the other 2 guys were gone, I'm going to introduce Frank Sinatra. What the hell are you doing here, or something? He said, I suppose you think you sing? And the guy didn't say anything. He said, let me hear you say a note. Just to do, let me hear you do, So the guy went, and Silvers slaps him. And he slaps him. And it turned out to be, later I learned, he was very famous for this routine called a singing lesson. From here to here and away, bam, bam. He beat this guy to pieces. But at a certain point, he said, the hell with it, walked off the stage, music hit, and the guy started to sing, and it was Sinatra. And create empathy for an unpopular character, I learned in gold.
Yeah. It's amazing, and a tribute to Mr. Sinatra that he, I mean, do you think he knew some of these guys are resentful?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
It was as deliberate as it could be.
That's amazing. That's a performing lesson for sure. Have someone come up and beat the shit out of you, and then as long as we're talking about Frank Sinatra, I know you sort of stalked him for "Come Blow Your Horn," correct?
Yeah, I couldn't get him to read the script, and I knew his manager very well, who then became the head of Paramount. Howard Koch was his name. His son, for some years, ran the Academy. Howard Koch Jr. I just couldn't get him to read it, and so I started to do I sent him, the script was called Cock-a-Doodle-Doo at first, because it was about a kid brother waking up to the world. And he didn't read it. Week after week, he didn't read it. I sent him a dozen roosters and a script.
Again, don't try this today. I think that's probably.
When we changed it to "Come Blow Your Horn," we had a bugle team, or whatever you call a bugle group, playing in front of him when he knew he was driving out of his. Also with a script at the gate. And I followed him around the country. When my hair was very short and very dark, it looked like a helmet to him. And he was rehearsing with Lisa Minnelli one morning at NBC, and I don't know how I got through the guards at the gate, but I did. And as I walked in across an empty studio, he yelled, "How'd the helmet get in here? Get that helmet out of here!" And we were at Paramount, so I had the use of the studio, and they bought the picture. We were waiting with me for Sinatra, and so we had one. This was the ultimate thing. We sent him a corner of a room. In a big truck, we laid down a carpet. It had a reading chair with an ottoman, a nice reading light, a radio, a standing radio, with an album. Jackie Gleason had an album out called "Music to Read By." Had a pipe. It was a reading kit, the whole corner of a room, and a smoking jacket. And told the guys he went out in the middle of the afternoon, but it'll be late afternoon by you have it. He was away and coming home that night. I wanted him to come home and have it all in front of the door, and with the light on, and make sure you take a long cord so you can plug it in somewhere. And they came back and said it was perfect. As they were leaving in the dusk, the light was on. It was the corner of the room. What I didn't bargain for was that some people who worked for him came before him and put things away. I never heard from him, and some days later I called his agent, who I knew very well by then, and said, "Lenny, tell him, forget it. I don't care if he ever reads it, and he knew what I had done, because he helped me with the long cord idea and everything. And he said, "I can't believe you didn't use it. I can't believe it." And when he told Sinatra, Sinatra called, because he thought it was the best joke he'd ever. But all he had seen was a smoking jacket in his closet. He didn't see a rug or the this or that or the other. He didn't understand. He thought, somebody gave him a jacket, he couldn't remember it. But anyway, he read the script, and we did the film.
And then you have, I think, maybe the only successful story about retakes.
he was very famous for not doing retakes, and he was right 90% of the time.
Ocean's 11 was just, I'm going to do this if I just can film everything in one take and don't bother me
Yes.
after that, right?
So I understand.
Yeah.
I wasn't there with that. But, you know, the sound man would say, I think I heard a plane or something. He said, my mother in New Jersey won't hear that. And we move on. The next day I would see the dailies, and he's right. Music covers it. It's not gonna. It isn't going to be a problem. But there was a moment when I was on the set with a guy that they were paging from time to time, who would say, they would page Dr. Stern, and this guy would say, here. And he what the hell was his name? He was a mobster who went with Dorothy McGuire, who went with, one of the McGuire sisters. Anyway, there were 3 sisters. And my script called for her to wear a leopard coat. The leopard coat could have been anything, but I wrote leopard coat. So the wardrobe person got 2 leopard coats, which were all there were in Beverly Hills. And Dr. Stern didn't like them. And he said, when are you shooting this? In a few days. He said, maybe you'll have to wait another day. By then I had learned that Dr. Stern was this mobster from, very famous, you'll know his name. And he was going with the McGuire sister, who was wearing a leopard coat. Anyway, by the time we shot, there were 2 racks of leopard coats. One had come out from Chicago and one from New York. She picked her leopard coat. But you can see I hate doing this.
But
such an imposition.
There was a passage in the book where you have an exchange with
Oh,
him about
so
the
yeah,
retake.
so I was on the set and something did go wrong, and I said, I think we have to do this again, Frank. He said, why, Pally? I said,
Good start.
Because of this. And he said, that's nothing, no way. I said, well, I'll look at the dailies tomorrow. I looked at the dailies and I thought, we really have to do this again. So I called him. His start time was 11 o'clock. It's 10:30, so he's in a makeup chair in his dressing area. And he gets on the phone. I said, Frank, that scene, we really have to do it again. He said, no way. I said, no, seriously, we have to do it. And he said, I said, there's no effing way. And I said, there has to be. And he said, you just tell me give me one good reason why. I said, because I effing said so. And that scared the hell out of me. He said, what scared the hell out of me, he said, okay. and then I was scared. Because I wouldn't yell at him, I was joking. And, but he said, okay.
So you
That's
yelled.
So I learned that.
You have to be the only recorded person who yelled at Frank Sinatra and got
but
a yes
didn't mean
after it.
I would.
It's a very successful enterprise. That's. Do you want me to? Sorry, I'm going to take the
Sure.
questions from people here that we can go through, and we can talk about anything that I've neglected to, I know you did a thing recently with Common and talked a lot about.
Oh, that was a great evening. Great evening.
Good times and.
Were you there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat any. I mean, there are questions, but if there's stuff.
No, it was a wonderful evening. It's a conversation that wants to take place more.
Yeah.
It grew to a place. It started with, 7 major people out of hip hop. What the tagline was? It was an evening with Norman Lear. What do a 92-year-old Jew and the world of hip hop have in common? So Common was there, and Torre, and D. Nice, and Marla Gibbs, and I mean it was, and what's his name, from Def Jam.
Oh, Russell Simmons.
Russell Simmons, yeah, great guys. But they were talking about what episodes, not just the shows, but episodes. They got very specific about what certain episodes meant to them as kids, and as you know, growing up. And I mean, it was so touching, so touching. But it had a message. I mean, it wasn't just about me. It was about what the culture, what storytelling, what acting, what the arts means in our culture, and how much can be accomplished by the arts. And which leads me to, because I think it all the time, you know, this world needs saving. And I don't want to wake up the morning, I don't believe it won't be. But when it's saved, the arts will have kicked open the door, whether it's music or performance or film or whatever. The door will have been kicked open by the arts, and the policies and politics will follow. I can't imagine that. That sounded like a good closing.
It's actually not a terrible segue.
If I were producing this.
That's right. Well, in editing, we can. Oh, no, we can't do that? All right. Live streaming, you can't edit a live stream. I guess that would be time travel. It does segue to this person's question from Scott. Wanted to know about your experience working on South Park, who is certainly, that show has certainly kicked out a lot of doors open. Yeah. What are your thoughts about, well, this gets very general, so I'll just say your experience working on South Park and just about cartoons as sitcom and the state of the sitcom today.
Yeah, well, it's an exaggeration to say I worked on South Park. The guys asked me their 100th episode, this is a long time ago, was coming up, and they asked, since Cartman was based on Archie, they wanted to do Archie badly, you know, very much, and the only way they could figure to do him was as a child. So that's how South Park came about. They're on. I saw an interview on 60 Minutes where they told that story. So I wouldn't repeat it if I didn't have the proof. But I love them, and I love South Park. And the Book of Mormon, for those who haven't seen it, is the greatest gift to sanity that I know of. It's just fabulous. So they asked me to, you know, if I would, as their 100th came up, if I would, you know, work with them on their 100th. This was with their group. And they were going to someplace in Arizona, I think, to spend a couple of days. And I said, why not go down there? I'd love that to be with you guys. So I spent a couple of days with them. And I think they gave me credit as a writer for the season, because we talked about all kinds of things. But, you know, there was no writing or anything, and I wasn't the contributor. Their writers were. You know. But they gave me credit, certainly. And then I think I played Ben Franklin on a show.
Well, I mean, there is a kinship, because certainly the way people used to talk about episodes of your shows.
Yeah. Oh, and then I'm a minister. I'm a reverend of the Universal Life Church, a mail order church. Cost me a full $10. But I did fly to Hawaii and marry Trey. The first time he was married, they're divorced, but I performed the ceremony that first time he married.
Wow. Yeah, I remember when their first little tape got passed around of, I believe it was Santa versus Jesus, I think. Did you ever see that?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
They used to pass the videotape around. With the technology, I can't believe that sounds so old now to say videotape. But Yeah, I said I couldn't, but oh, they're gonna have a show on Comedy Central. Like, oh well, that's wow. Who knew that? I mean, that's like one of the longest, maybe the longest running comedy at this point. I don't know how it. I mean,
Simpsons.
Simpsons. Sorry, right? Yes. So those two.
Yeah.
But did you ever deal with the Simpsons people at all? They seem like they would be.
No.
You know,
I mean, I'm friends with
kindred spirits.
But no, I never did.
Here is a general, but something that's covered in the book to a great extent, and certainly I think we'd all like to hear what inspired you to get into the business.
What inspired me to?
To get into show business. There's probably a number of points you can.
I was a kid of the Depression. There was one uncle who ever flicked me a quarter. His name was Jack. He was a press agent. So I wanted to be a press agent. I didn't know at first what a press agent was. I learned over time. But, you know, my folks never asked me what I wanted to be or seemed to care. And that was an uncle who could flick a quarter to a nephew. That seemed good. I wanted to be him. And so from Foggia, Italy, I stood over a printer, and they picked a letter at a time. I spoke a little Italian, and I sent a page out to my Uncle Jack, who was still a press agent, and the page was me announcing that I was going to be discharged. The war was coming to an end. I would soon be discharged, and I wanted to be the guy behind the guy. They say, "Who's that with so-and-so?" I want to be, "Who's that?" A press agent. It was a lot of fancy language. And I don't know how many he sent out, but out of that group, I had a firm offer for a job and a job interview. 2 responses, both of them positive. And the job interview came up before the other. No, I took the job interview just to see before I took the job. Anyway, I worked as a press agent. And what's the question?
Just what inspired you to get into?
Oh, well, as a press agent, you wrote, in those years, there were a lot of columnists. So basically what I was doing was writing funny things or witticisms or funny comments for our various clients. I mean, that's how I got fired too, because I wrote very funny.
Yeah, actually, the one you got fired on.
The one I got fired for, I was preceded by Kitty Carlisle was the name some of you might remember. She was a very famous performer and actress, and Morse Hart was a great playwright, and they were both clients, independent of each other. And I wrote for a columnist named Dorothy Kilgallen, who had a major column in the Journal American, New York Journal American. And my column item was that Kitty Carlisle gifted Morse Hart with a pocket flask measured to his hip while he napped. And somebody must have said to Miss Kilgallen, "What the hell is that?" Because she called my boss, George Royce, and said, "I want him fired." Or who wrote that? I'd get it. I got I was making $40 a week. They took me down to 35 as punishment. We had some weeks later, I wrote another item. We had a review on Broadway called "Are You With It?" Jane Dulo, I just remembered the name, was one of the stars. And I close to remember a couple of Johnny Downs. I don't know if anybody remembers Johnny Downs was another star. And it was a review, so there was all kinds of acts on it. And one act was Buster Shaver and his midgets. And the lead midget was named Olive. So I wrote and Kilgallen printed. Buster, Shaver, and Olive seen shopping Fifth Avenue. He on foot, she on a St. Bernard. And I was called into George. And my wife was, we were married. My wife was pregnant, and we just gave up New York and went to Connecticut and had the baby there.
That was the end, the first end of your...
The first end.
But fired for obviously excelling at what would later be your career.
As it turned out, because it always gets a laugh.
When I read that in the book, I burst out laughing, because the perfect setup is to say, if this guy, one more wise remark out of this writer, whoever that is, and then that just sent me over that. There's a question, I'm going to read you this, and then you may know, I don't know about this, so you may know more. Someone named Susan is very encouraged to learn that you were key in establishing the Sundance new episode Story Lab. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, my wife and I.
Oh, okay. So her question...
My wife is on the board at Sundance. So.
Ah, okay. So her questions are just, how do you see the landscape of TV changing, and how would you like it to change? We may have talked a little about that, but anything within that framework of Sundance?
Well, the Sundance Lab is helping people develop their talents, you know, for television, for storytelling, basically. I don't know. Maybe I don't have enough imagination to imagine. We already have 7,000 channels, or 40,000, I don't know. There is so much. You know, 5 times a week, somebody I respect a great deal will say to me, "Are you watching? You're not watching
Yeah.
some show?" And I know they're right, because I have often enough turned to that show. But I'm not and haven't been. Maybe it's because all of the early years of my career in television, I was working those nights. I'm not a habit. Why is that what they call it? A habit viewer? It's
a binge watcher?
It's close to 11 o'clock before I think about television. And then there's Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll watch Jon Stewart, John Oliver, Larry Wilmore now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love him. So.
Yeah, I started out with Jon Stewart.
Did you?
He did a little better at stand-up, yeah. We started out right at the same time, and it was quite a revelation in terms of, I think literally the second time I was ever on stage, he was there, some godforsaken open mic. And I went on and bombed and had no idea what I was doing, and it was a horror show, and I'm still sweating.
Would you do a little bit of for us now?
Cut the camera. Cut the camera. My recurring, I don't want to turn this into about me, but my recurring, my recurring nightmare, where my therapy comes in, is, I think, because I've been a writer now, just a writer for 15, 16 years. And I was getting pretty successful I was doing all right in stand-up. Every night, almost every night, same nightmare, I'm going on stage somewhere, someone's saying, you're headlining, it's always I have to do about 45 minutes or something like that. And I'm explaining to them, no, there must be some mistake, I can't remember I don't have an act, I have nothing. And in the dream, I'm even trying to remember my actual act from my actual life. Yeah. And it's not coming together, and I'm thinking, what am I gonna do? I said something about college is stupid, but then I don't. And as I'm being brought on stage, the lights go on, and I wake up. It's like the falling dream, except it's the failing dream or something. So I tell you in all seriousness, I could not give you a joke from my act, right? I mean, I think it's just in some panic room in my head.
What did you say when you walked out?
What you mean, when I would go on stage?
First thing out of your mouth.
why am I here? No, I don't. I can't remember. I mean, there's a lot of, you know.
You can't remember hello?
Well, I don't know if that would get a laugh.
Good evening?
Yeah. Yeah, I got to know a lot of the comics, and Jon was the revelation because after I bombed, he went on, and this was probably his first or second time on stage.
Really?
And he did 5 minutes that, if I could remember it, I would do today. It was that good. And it wasn't to the level of where he's at now. I remember he had a joke about, this is his joke, I just want to say it. The Diamond District at lunchtime in New York, and he would talk about at the lunch whistle, you know, 12 o'clock, and like a bell goes off, and hundreds of Orthodox Jews make a beeline for the one kosher Blimpies on the corner. And then he'd go, Yidlock. That was, but, so I don't know if I'd do that today. That probably is not a joke I should do. But he was so good, and it's a great, I mean, Larry Wilmore's fantastic, and he will be replaced somehow, but probably not when he got that job.
Oh, there won't be another him, because he's altogether unique, but
yeah, yeah.
Somebody will fill the half hour.
You should go on his show. You going to go on his show?
I did his show.
Okay. I should watch his show, obviously. We watch it every night as well, so somehow I missed you. I don't know how that happened. This is very embarrassing. Let's move on. Someone wanted to ask about, and I actually had a question myself, writing for live television and, you know, in general, and then Martin and Lewis in particular. Any, you know, I know you have a couple of great...
Well, live television, I told you about Martha Ray. I mean, up at 8, off at 9. It was, you know, the first... This is interesting. The first sketch we wrote for D. Martin, Jerry Lewis on the Colgate Comedy Hour, the motion picture industry, the motion picture industry was afraid of television taking its audience, and so they had a big campaign. You seem to remember over here a lot of things.
Yeah, he's remembered
movies are better than
said.
ever. Yeah. Remember that? Movies are better than ever was a huge campaign. And we were, our very first sketch, we did the exterior of a motion picture theater. Something was playing. Dean was the manager of the theater. Marilyn Maxwell was a hottie at the moment, a singer and beautiful. And she was a guest star in the show, and she played an usherette. And Jerry played a kid bouncing a ball who was passing by on his way home, and they are now, she's trying to vamp him to get him to buy a ticket. This is the motion picture, you know, the worst dream of the motion picture industry at the time. And Dean is there to beat him, you know, actually physically. And Jerry wants to go home, and she vamps and he beats the shit, and they get him inside finally, and he can't stand it inside. He's all alone. He thinks he sees. Anyway, that's the gist of the scene we wrote. After the show, and there were 2 more scenes and so forth, but it was riotous, and the audience went crazy. It was Dean and Jerry at the very beginning. I mean, it was the very first time on television. The audience went crazy. And I was terribly upset because Jerry, being Jerry, left the bones of the sketch and did a lot of things that I didn't expect and so forth. So I'm with my agent after the show, and his wife. We're in a Chinese restaurant. I'm all but crying. I'm so upset. And he's saying, "You're crazy. I mean, you know, that's all they'll be talking about around the water coolers tomorrow. Everybody will be talking about Dean and Jerry." And of course, that was true. The next day, I had been, you know, but I wasn't crying about the show wasn't working or people were falling down laughing. Or I was upset because the meaning of the sketch was, what we were trying to do might have been, or I thought, destroyed. But several weeks later, so upset were the motion picture exhibitors that Dean and Jerry, under instruction or advice from their agents, took out a full-page ad apologizing to the motion picture exhibitors. That was my first sketch, and so evidently the meaning had gotten across.
Yeah, now you would do the sketch would be TV is better than ever, and you would have to apologize to the internet. You also, I won't ask you to tell it unless you want to, but there's a little bit of a crazy Jerry Lewis story in there, a couple of them, I think. Yeah, read the book.
Read the book, yeah.
It's worth reading, just if you thought he was nuts, you'll have that reinforced. What can you tell us about The Night They Raided Minsky's?
It's a very good film.
There you have it.
It's a wonderful. I love it. It's a wonderful film. I loved burlesque. I learned a lot. I went to Emerson for that 1 year.
Oh yeah. Can you write a letter of recommendation for my daughter? I wanted to say.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Just wanted to get that out of the way in front of everybody.
You have a daughter old enough to go to college?
Almost. We're looking.
So do I.
I feel like that should be the
I
question.
have 2 daughters in college.
Ah, that's...
They're twins and they're sophomores.
I have 2 parents who are your daughters, or something like that. It works the other way.
I have my daughters. I have 5. They range from 20 to 68.
Wow.
That's amazing. I didn't mean to take you away from, you were talking about The Night They Raided Minsky's and burlesque. Yeah, burlesque was it. Yeah.
So in Boston, there was an area of Boston called Scully Square. And at Scully Square, there was a burlesque house called the Old Howard. It was, I think it had to have been the best known burlesque house in the country. And I saw, a year of, I never missed a show at the Old Howard. So I saw Ann Corio and Gypsy Rose Lee and all of them, and some great comics, Joey Fay, and I don't know. There's only somebody here that we remember. And Phil Silvers. I was the one among the 20,000 in Foggia who knew that was Phil Silvers.
Right.
Because I had seen him in burlesque. Anyway, I don't know what else to say. It's a great.
Yeah.
Was there something I've overlooked?
No. I think we have to actually close up shop. I don't know if there's a final question. Would you like to talk about ecstasy?
Yeah. I'll tell you, because you met my father, I'll tell you a story about my mother. I got a call a great many years ago that I had been, that the Television Academy was going to start a Hall of Fame. And Norman, my friend, said, these are the first inductees. William Paley, who started CBS, David Sarnoff, who started NBC, Patty Chayefsky, the greatest of the writers to come out of television, Edward R. Murrow, the best foreign correspondent, Lucille Ball, Milton Berle, and you. So I was in the habit of calling my mother with good news. I ran to the phone and called her in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Mom, I just learned that the Academy, they haven't done this yet, they're going to build a Hall of Fame. And these are the first inductees, and I rattled off the names, and me. And she said, listen, if that's what they want to do, who am I to say?
Norman Lear, everybody.
Thank you. Oh, my God. Thank you. Thank you.